Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the first installment in a terrifying series by the incredibly talented CreepyAus. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Seal Island Incident. Let's get straight into that. It's not often as a scientist you wish you hadn't looked into something. Quite a few years ago now, I was part of a special scientific expedition to False Bay, South Africa. You've probably seen a lot about it on Shark Week, because this spot is infamous for being one of the sharkiest places on Earth. The great whites turn out in their hundreds to prey on the thousands of Cape Fur seals that call the aptly named Seal Island home. As a marine biologist, I have always dreamed of working with the sharks of False Bay, and so you can imagine I was excited when I originally got the call. One of my colleagues, a guy I went through uni with all the way to our respective PhDs, had been handed what he called a fascinating, if slightly unusual assignment, and personally sought me out as one of the research scientists. Even without a lot of details, I jumped at the chance. Sharks were hardly my speciality, but False Bay is such an iconic place that I wasn't worried in the slightest. I was sure I'd adapt. I flew into Cape Town on a miserable winter's morning. The sky was full of fat, angry grey clouds, and out of the window of the plane I could see countless white flecks on the surface of the sea as the harsh wind stripped the top of the swell. Callum, or more officially Dr. Callum Short, the man who recruited me, met me as I struggled off the red-eyed service. He looked restless and eager as he wrapped me in a hug. "I'm so glad to see you, Ellie. It's going to be unreal working together again." I grinned, despite being bone-achingly tired. And Callum was always an infectious kind of guy. Well, when a guy who spends most of his time wrangling monster sharks gives me a call for a hand, I find it hard to refuse. He gave a knowing smile. We might not be wrangling many sharks on this trip, but I think we'll make up for it. Come on, we're going straight to the boat. I'll tell you all about it when we get there. Fine, but first I need a massive coffee. It was a reasonably short trip to the docks, lightning in fact compared to the red-eye from Perth to Joburg. I was surprised when we were hurried on board, the vessel already idling and ready to head out. I thought it would have been too late in the morning for the sharks to be active. I wasn't surprised, though, to discover that 6 of the 8 scientists on board were women. And Callum always preferred to work with women, to the point that it earned him an unfair reputation as a bit of a philanderer. The truth was that Callum had been burned by less than ethical research partners on the past, and had come to believe that men would eventually care more about competition than collaboration. Or, as he eloquently put it one night in a Townsville pub, it just inadvertently devolves into a fight over who has the biggest swingingest dick. I never had the same issue myself, but maybe because I lacked the proper equipment for a dick measuring contest, I'd just never been subjected to it. We gathered in the conference room of the spacious vessel when I learned the names of everyone else. The 5 other women were Cassie, an ecologist, Maria and Helen, shark biologists, Janice, a zoologist, and Callum's PhD student Claire. The other man was an oceanographer named Kevin. And Callum rejoined us as the small talk started to fade out. Please, sit down. It's going to get rough when we get out into the teeth of the wind." As if on cue, a freezing gust buffeted the ship, and I clutched at the chair for support. He laughed. "I see you've all met Ellie, our resident deep-sea evolutionary biologist. Obviously, I don't have to explain the history of this place to any of you. Only 2 other known sites match this one in terms of white shark aggregation: the Neptune Islands and the waters around Guadeloupe. Well, it's been the crucible of white shark science for decades, and we're still learning. He paused, shuffling through a thick pile of papers. Last year, we began to notice something odd about white shark behavior in this area. Normally, the sharks here are relatively transient. They come in and out of the bay and track along the coast and out to sea in the meantime. Individual animals don't actually spend more than a few days within the bay itself. But 4 or 5 times a year, the sharks push right into the bay. They stop going out to sea and they spend a good week or more in the shallower waters along the coast. In that week or two, we don't see the sharks more often, but as we started tracking more and more of them, we've realized that number of sharks in the bay might be as high as 3 times the norm for this period. We're here to work out why. He cleared his throat before continuing. This unusual behavior, and obviously it has local authorities concerned. Like it or not, white sharks are apex predators, and an unpredictable influx of equally unpredictable sharks in an area where they are comfortable and feed often is still cause for concern. A greater number of human-shark interactions means the potential for disaster is much higher, and that's not good for people or the sharks. He surveyed the attentive faces around the table. 2 days ago, the shark spontaneously pushed right into the bay again. We estimate we've probably got anywhere from 7 days to a fortnight before everything goes back to normal. And so, our remit, if you will, is to work out why the sharks behave this way, and whether we can predict it so that appropriate safety measures can be taken. Sharks are part of life here, and so adaptations need to be made because of this behavior, and then the authorities need to be in a position where they understand the issues. We've already eliminated the obvious. This behavior seems random, with no clear link to any one trigger, and that's why we've had to expand our team the way we have. The others immediately bombarded Callum with questions, but I turned them out. I could already tell most of what they were asking about was the obvious. Callum was very thorough, although prone to narrowing his focus and missing the big picture at times. And as I thought it through, it seemed like he had missed something big after all. Conversation hit a lull. We're all only talking about the sharks. Why? And there's a lot more animals than just sharks around here. What are the other animals doing when the sharks behave this way? Callum looked at me, the corner of his eyes crinkling imperceptibly. I actually don't know. What are you getting at? Of course, he knew the answer already, but not everyone in the room was as sharp. Well, sharks aren't the only large animal in the bay, are they? And there's the sills, who head offshore to feed. So do the penguins. I'm not sure about the bay itself, but also within the habitual range of a few different dolphins. And then there are the transients. Orcas are found in the area, as well as other whale species. It seems to me that they're as relevant as the sharks in all of this. Orcas prey on white sharks, penguins, seals and dolphins, and so their behaviour certainly seems relevant. Callum smirked, more in a self-depreciating way than anything. That would probably have been a good place to start, huh? I'll get in touch with a few other researchers, see if their data sheds any light. There's a lot fewer tracking devices on those animals than on sharks though, so it might turn out to be useless. We're making for Seal Island now, mostly because it's a focal point and we can monitor the tags a lot easier from there. Feel free to wander the ship a bit, familiarise yourselves with it. We might be here for a week or so. The others took the opportunity to wander out in small groups, but I stayed behind with Callum and Claire. Something was bugging me. I was an evolutionary biologist. Well, evolutionary ecologist, just as I've been introduced. But I specialised in water dozens of times deeper than False Bay. I knew enough, but I was quite literally out of my depth. Callum just told me that he wanted me on the team because I was a good scientist, but it felt more like he was holding something back. By this point, however, I was absolutely exhausted, and so I went to bed. We spent a few days just gathering data. The tags Callum had been fitting to the sharks were pretty remarkable, able to transmit a signal to a receiver on board the boat that determined a precise location and direction, depth and distance, and then plotted it on a map. No more holding TV aerials and chasing the beeps around like maddened goose. It became clear that the sharks were definitely holding in the bay, and when the other data came in, it seemed that other animals were doing the same. Seals, penguins, dolphins, all penned in the bay as though trapped by some unseen force. The only thing we had no data on was the orcas, and so we originally thought that maybe they were the culprits. And that was quickly scrapped when we heard the fishermen hadn't seen a single fin for over a week. The orcas had gone. And so what the hell was going on? I've been doing this a while at this stage, and all this data was giving me an uncomfortable feeling in my gut. Science might pride itself on rationality, but instinct still rules, and my instinct was telling me this wasn't right. Animals only scattered like this when there was a problem. Large animals, especially apex predators, very rarely had a problem. Anyway, it seemed like the only way we were going to get answers was to head offshore. The weather wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't dangerous either. We churned a search pattern through the heaving seas a few k's offshore, looking at everything we could. We were looking for tags on the acoustic receiver and found none. There were no sharks out here. We had the crew keeping an eye out for orcas, and they saw absolutely nothing. We took the water temperature as well as we went. We tested it for all sorts of contaminants. Everything came up normal, and the knot in my stomach grew tighter. This was a classic rich spot, two currents meeting to drive a huge biodiversity. So why is it seemingly dead? I think it was day 5 or 6 when I first noticed it. I was going over some tapes in the lab with Cassie when I heard the faintest sound that didn't quite fit, a rapid-fire clicking. I thought I imagined it at first, but when I asked Cassie to take a listen, she heard it too. It was, well, like I said, very faint, but it was unmistakably a coda. And for the uninitiated, a coda is an indicator of echolocation on a massive scale. It's a common myth that all whales use sonar or echolocation to supplement their senses. Only toothed whales can use this kind of sonar, and only the largest of them can produce the coda. Sperm whales have that massive squared-off head because it's dedicated entirely to echolocation. Their head is filled with oil, which is why they were so prized by whalers, and at the top of their skull is a structure that looks like a satellite dish. This amplifies the rapid-fire clicks required for echolocation to a ludicrous scale. A large bull sperm whale can produce a coda of over 200 decibels, louder than a jet engine and, at the wrong range, loud enough to rupture a human eardrum. It's used not only to see in the inky black world of the abyssal sea where they hunt, but I have been working on a theory that they used it to disorient their prey. If there were sperm whales around, maybe that would help narrow down what we were looking for, or cross some things off the list. After some debate, we resolved to find them. The acoustic receiver we used for the tags was able to give us a rough location, pointing us to an area where the continental shelf is scarred by a series of deep ravines snaking their way up from the abyssal plain. This made sense to me. Sperm whales hunt squid, and places where there are trenches and canyons give them a bottleneck in which to hunt. I wish I'd never heard that godforsaken coda. I wish I didn't know what I know now. It's a tough story to tell, but it needs to be told. The deeper water we were heading for was about 20 kilometers offshore, an easy stint for our vessel, even in moderate seas. The hydrophones kept picking up the coda, rhythmic and regular. It increased in volume as we got closer to, which is when I realized something was very wrong. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they were just too wrapped up in their own samples and studies, and whatever, to notice. There's a lot of boring stuff I've left out, or how one scientist had a theory about algal blooms and another was working on something about sonar pollution, among other ideas. There was a lot of different tangents, but as an ecologist, I hadn't really had a lot to do yet, and so I was paying close attention to the hydrophones. I began to realise the coda never changed. It was precisely the same pattern every single time. Sperm whales don't do that. Each whale has an individual signature and makes a huge number of different sounds depending on the purpose of that sound. Whatever we were heading towards was not a sperm whale. The knot in my stomach tightened to the point of physical pain. My gut instinct telling me that nothing about this situation was right. Vast numbers of animals don't just vacate an area for no reason. And a mysterious sound popping up at the same time was too much to be a coincidence. I pulled Callum aside and tried to voice my fears, but he just shook me off. This is bigger than sharks. Everything is gone, Ellie. We need to work this out. I trust your gut, but we could be onto something big here. He was right, of course, but I wish he hadn't been. As we got within a click or so of the canyons, and the very first signs of the edge of the drop started to appear on the sounder, the coda we were tracking simply stopped. It was bizarre. This thing had been sounding off for days, and it stopped just as we got close. I couldn't understand it. While everyone was so focused on shoehorning their own theories into what we were doing all the way out here, I sat in a quiet conference room and just thought about it. Honestly, it took far too long for it to hit me. We were blasting sonar into the water, working out topography and currents and whatever else. Sonar-producing animals are incredibly sensitive to sonar by virtue of the organs they use to detect it. Our sounders must have spooked whatever was making the noises, caused it to go quiet or even leave the area. I have to admit I relaxed a little bit then, although I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. I went to bed earlier than the others. It was a restless, uneasy night for me. Have you ever tried to sleep when your brain is all wound up, trying to work out whatever it is that you can't quite recall? I was tossing and turning, half awake, when I heard that coda kick off again. Only this time, it wasn't on tape, but reverberating all around me. And suddenly, horribly, the pieces floating around my mind finally clicked into place. A coda like that, repeated ad nauseum, in exactly the same pattern at exactly the same frequency, would be near enough to useless for echolocation. It would interfere with itself, blocking out any image coming back, or in fact, it would only be useful for broadcasting. And that was why the sharks and orcas and everything else pushed out of the deep water. They might not be able to understand the sound, but they could still hear it. To them, the tone was painful, too strong to be anything but maddening. But to the largest creatures, the ones who could properly process the information and who communicated at high volume themselves, it would be a curiosity. A sound repeated over and over in something equating to their own language would be well worth investigating. It was a lure. I had thrown myself out of bed and started racing towards the lab area, completely disregarding my dishevelled, half-dressed appearance, and when I noticed that the clicks, they were getting louder. I barged in on Callum, still awake and frantically checking instruments. He barely started as I flew through the door. "What the hell is this, Ellie?" I didn't answer for a second, my eyes flicking towards the screen that was taking the sound of feed, and my blood ran cold. It's a fucking lure, Cal! Look! On the screen, a gargantuan shape was rising under the vessel. It had no real form on the sounder, which was only meant to show depth and bottom features, simply looking like a massive blob lifting itself off the sea floor several kilometers below. Callum stared, clearly at a loss as to what he was seeing. "What? That's huge. Is it a super pod of whales? Why is it so loud? What the fuck is happening?" I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. "It's something else, Cal. I should have seen it earlier. The sound was all wrong. It's not echolocation. This is why the sharks pushed inshore. They're hiding. A look of horror crossed his face as he realized what I was saying. He immediately grabbed the phone that connected us to the bridge. Get us out of here now! The ship was powered up, held in position by directional thrusters, and so I prayed that it wouldn't be too long before we were underway. It was clear that whatever was lurking down in a dark canyon wanted to get a closer look at us, or worse, had already mistaken us for prey. On the sounder, it easily looked big enough to capsize the ship. I had barely a second to register just how fast this thing was rising. Jesus, it was already 2/3 of the way to the surface. And just then, the sound changed. Instead of a loud, repetitive coda, it became a ghastly shrieking, far louder than I could bear. I fell to the floor, hands clamped over my ears. My vision began swimming, and my mind fracturing. And I was vaguely aware that some of the glass equipment in the cabin was shattering explosively under the onslaught. Callum, good old quick-thinking Cal, was at my side a few seconds later. He grabbed 2 of the pairs of noise-cancelling headphones that were sitting on the bench top, and he shoved a pair over my ears. It wasn't really the intended purpose, and they were by no means proper ear protection, but they did just enough to allow me to drag myself up. He was pointing to the door that led to the staircase up to the main deck. As more glass went off and peppered my arms, I understood we needed to get somewhere less fragile than the lab. We reached the deck, the cold air hitting me like an actual impact. I was still barely dressed. Callum led me into a relative shelter of the aft command area, where the large windows were reinforced enough to deal with the ice impact and massive swells. The sound was immense. We were under physical assault. I could feel it crashing through me. Out the window, I could see the wake of the ship just starting to stretch out behind us. I registered, fleetingly, that we were at least on our way out of the area, and then the wall of sound brought me to my knees. I couldn't see how far away it was, because I had lost all sense of these things by then. But some distance behind the ship, I saw the surface of the water break, and whatever had been underneath us was now on the surface. It came up like a submarine in a breach, obliterating the ocean surface in a vast mass of white foam. It was far too dark to make out details, but the waning moon and the light of the ship itself gleamed off of too much dark, slick skin for me to process. The shrieking wall of noise ratcheted up a few more octaves, and my body finally gave in at this increased assault, and my brain shut down, sweeping me into unconsciousness. I woke up to a naval officer, gently checking my vital signs. The sun was out, but I was disorientated and began to thrash around, overcome by panic I felt before I blacked out. I only remember snatches of time for a little bit, being restrained by the officers, being stretchered on board their vessel, glimpses of faces here and there. I think I truly came to my senses a couple of days later, lying in hospital. I had the most awful ringing in my ears and one of my eardrums had ruptured. But apart from shock and a few minor traumatic effects, I was deemed okay. Callum too had a reasonably clean bill of health. There were 12 other survivors, including the crew members who made it. Of our colleagues, only Cassie and Claire lived through the attack, along with 8 of the crew. I didn't look into how the others died exactly. I didn't want to know. It turned out our captain had been quick enough on his feet to send a distress signal. As he ordered a vessel pointed towards shore at full bore, he was one of the survivors, and we owe him our lives for both of those acts. Even when he blacked out, both eardrums shattered and bleeding from the eyes, the ship chugged on, oblivious to the things that affected its fleshy cargo. The Navy found us later the next afternoon, and the survivors were airlifted back to Cape Town. They made up some ridiculous cover story, but I was too shell-shocked to even care. Cal left his work in South Africa, returning to Australia and becoming utterly obsessed with depths. He wanted to find out what happened that night, miles off of False Bay, so desperately that he wrecked his career in his pursuit. We've only spoke once since the incident. About a week after it happened, he visited me in my hotel. I was about to fly home and he wanted to tell me his plans. We had a brief chat, both still suffering the psychological echoes of our experience. I told him what I saw, and he seemed torn between thinking it was a hallucination and believing me. I can't blame him. I wondered the same thing myself all the time. He wondered why and how the creatures had attacked us, and my incoherent thoughts from the ship's common area came flooding back. "Stunning," I said. He frowned. "I've been working on a theory that sperm whales can use their sonar to stun or disorient their prey, not just see. It fits here. Whatever that thing was, it lured us in with the imitation whale coda, and then, when we were in range, it blasted us with the sound. It was springing a trap. Maybe it thought we were a whale?" Well, we've not spoken since. As for me, it took me over a year to get back on the water. I worked as a lecturer for a bit, keeping my feet firmly planted on solid ground. But it always called to me. This kind of work is part of me, and it was inevitable that I would find my way back eventually. I have to admit, I was shitting myself on a first dive. Instinct took over quickly enough though, and shortly I was back to full and active research. That was several years ago, and my work was as rewarding and straightforward as it ever was before Seal Island. Until a month ago, anyway. You see, last month I was running a routine dive out off of Perth, mostly to calibrate some new research instruments. We were running through a canyon that lies about 20 kilometers off of Rodnest Island. I was chatting with my partner on the dive, boring stuff, when I found myself trailing off and ice filling my veins. Over the small talk and the sound of the sub-engines, I heard the unmistakable sound of a short coda, repeating in bursts that were far too regular for echolocation. Wow, 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 and another one, wow. Once again, as it always is with CreepyAus, absolutely riveting, nail-biting story, and lots of mystery involved with that one. Looking forward to narrating the next chapter as things heat up with this incredible series. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. Of course, if you have a story you'd like to share with us here on the show, whether it's a true or fictional piece, please do get it over to myself at the usual email, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. As ever guys, I hope you're all well and happy, family and friends are well, and you're keeping fit and focused. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.